Love is not just for this world. If you want to discover feelings that transcend boundaries, subscribe now. I woke to silence, so deep it rang in my ears. It was the kind of silence that didn't just lack sound but seemed to absorb it, swallowing even the faintest echo before it could form. The air was thin, too weightless, carrying no scent of earth, no hint of rain or life. Instead, a sterile sharpness clung to it, something metallic, something unnatural. My body felt wrong, heavy, yet unmoored, as if gravity had shifted just enough to make my limbs rebel against me. I inhaled, slow and deliberate, but did nothing to steady me. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Light trickled through the vast crystalline dome above me, shifting in impossible hues, violet bleeding into gold, deep blue flickering into molten silver. It was liquid and alive, shifting with some unseen rhythm, pulsing as though the very sky were breathing. It wasn't the sky I knew. It wasn't the sky of Earth. Panic tightened around my ribs. I tried to sit up, my muscles slow to respond, my movements sluggish like I was moving through water. The last thing I remembered, walking home beneath a heavy, starless night, the distant hum of a flickering street lamp, the pavement slick beneath my shoes. Then, a sudden brilliance. A searing white explosion that consumed the sky, my vision, my mind. And now this. The surface beneath me was smooth, metallic, colder than ice, harder than steel. I pressed my palm against it, willing myself to feel something, anything familiar. But the cold bit into my skin, lifeless and indifferent. A sound, low, melodic, neither mechanical nor human, drew my attention. My head snapped toward the source, and my eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the room. And then, I saw her. She stood at the threshold, tall and eerily poised, her silhouette stark against the pulsating walls. The light behind her traced her figure in an almost ethereal glow, casting shadows too soft to be entirely real. Her skin shimmered, not quite silver, not quite pearl, as if it couldn't decide whether to reflect the light or absorb it. It wasn't pale in the way human skin was. It was luminescent, subtly iridescent, like polished opal. Her hair, impossibly long, cascaded down her back, but it moved as though untouched by gravity, shifting lazily in a way that made my stomach turn. Yet none of it unnerved me as much as her eyes. They weren't human. Too vast, too deep. They held the weight of entire galaxies, shifting constellations trapped in their depths. Threads of gold wove through endless darkness, stars swallowed whole within the abyss of her gaze. They weren't just eyes. They were something more. She watched me with an expression I couldn't define, something between curiosity and ownership. Not quite cold, not quite kind. "You are awake." The words resonated inside my skull, though her lips remained still. Her voice was smooth, edged with something ancient, something that carried the weight of centuries. It didn't sound like speech. It felt like thought, planted directly into my mind. A surge of fear coiled in my stomach. I scrambled backward, my breath uneven. But what? My throat tightened, my tongue thick in my mouth. Where am I? She stepped forward, unhurried, deliberate. There was something unsettling about her movement, too fluid, too precise. Not a sound accompanied it. No shift of fabric, no brush of foot against the floor. As if she wasn't touching the ground at all. "You're where you're meant to be." I shook my head, the pounding in my skull growing stronger. No, this is a mistake. A mistake. Her head tilted slightly, an imitation of human expression that didn't quite fit her. "Your form is strong. Your mind is sufficient. You were chosen." Cold dread curled around my ribs. Chosen for what? Her gaze didn't waver. To be my mate. The words crashed into me, absurd and unrelenting. My body recoiled before my mind could fully process them. What? My voice cracked, the sheer impossibility of it tangling with my fear. "I don't even know what you are." She regarded me without offense, only measured patience, as though speaking to something fragile. "You will." The walls pulsed again, light shivering along their surface like a living thing. I forced myself to my feet, my muscles aching with resistance. I don't belong here. One silver eyebrow arched, and something flickered across her expression. Amusement? Then where do you belong? The question struck deeper than it should have. I opened my mouth, but the words stalled. Where did I belong? I thought of my apartment, the chipped paint on the walls, the empty fridge, the job I hated, the people I barely spoke to, the life I had spent years sleepwalking through, a slow, inevitable drift into nothingness. The answer should have been obvious, but the hesitation that followed wasn't lost on her. She stepped closer, and this time, there was something softer in her gaze, something almost patient. You assume this is an abduction. It is not. A humorless laugh scraped its way from my throat. Oh no? You kidnapped me, brought me to... I gestured wildly at the alien expanse beyond the dome, the unfamiliar stars, the 3 burning suns hanging in a sky too vast to be real. Wherever the hell this is. And now you're telling me I'm supposed to be your mate. She inclined her head, unruffled by my defiance. You were selected. My kind is diminishing. We require strength, intelligence, adaptability. You possess all 3. My hands curled into fists. I don't care what you need. I am not staying here. She exhaled, not a sigh, not breath, but a shift in the air, as if the atmosphere itself responded to her. You misunderstand. You were not forced to come. My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't exactly volunteer. She took another step, now only an arm's length away. Did you not? The words hung between us, heavier than they should have been. My immediate instinct was to reject them, to call her a liar, to demand she take me back. But something stopped me. A sliver of doubt. A whisper of something I couldn't quite silence. Because in the deepest part of me, the part one never examined too closely, there was a truth I didn't want to face. I had been drifting, untethered, directionless. Had some part of me, some subconscious, desperate part, wanted to disappear, to wake up somewhere new, with purpose forced upon me. I swallowed hard. I want to go home. She studied me, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she extended her hand. Not in command, not in ownership, but in invitation. Then I will show you, she said, voice softer now, almost human. And when you understand, you may choose. I stared at her hand, at the shimmering skin, the impossibility of it all. I had no reason to trust her, but I had even less to lose. And so, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I took her hand. Her hand remained wrapped around mine, firm yet unthreatening, as she led me deeper into a world I didn't understand. There was no sensation of movement beneath my feet, yet we moved effortlessly, the space around us shifting as though the architecture itself was alive. Doors didn't slide open. They dissolved, as if they had never truly existed to begin with. The air carried no true temperature, neither warm nor cold, but something in it felt charged, like standing on the edge of a storm that had yet to break. The corridors pulsed with dim, rhythmic light, and I had the distinct, unsettling sense that the walls responded, not to sound or movement, but to us. They darkened when my pulse spiked, brightened when my mind steadied. It was as though the entire structure was an extension of something greater, something aware. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. What is this place? She didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure if she was ignoring me or if she was simply deciding whether I deserved a response. The silence stretched until it felt intentional, a deliberate weight placed upon me. Then, finally she spoke. You will see. I clenched my teeth. That's not an answer. She glanced at me, and for the first time, I caught something unexpected in her expression. Not amusement, not detachment, but curiosity. Like she found my defiance interesting. Understanding is not given, she said. It is earned. Something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. There was no malice in her tone, no threat. But there was certainty. Whatever she intended to show me, it would not be simple. The next doorway dissolved before us, revealing a space vast beyond comprehension. The city stretched out beneath an impossibly high dome, its skyline spiraling in defiance of physics, a landscape of iridescent structures that shimmered with colors I had no names for. But unlike the corridors, This place breathed, not in the literal sense, but in the way living ecosystems did. The air had a pulse. The space had a presence. Beneath our feet, the ground rippled like liquid glass, distorting our reflections, yet somehow remaining solid. The city was not built in the way human cities were. No straight roads, no clear districts. The structures did not conform to logic. They grew, organic yet deliberate, forming patterns I felt rather than understood. And then there were them. Figures moved through the city, some humanoid, some shifting between solidity and translucence. Some looked like her, tall, poised, their luminous skin carrying the same ethereal glow. Others were different, less defined, more fluid in their forms. Some had no clear distinction between limbs and torso, their bodies moving in ways that seemed both purposeful and chaotic. I inhaled sharply. What are they? She studied me for a moment before answering. They are what remain. It wasn't an explanation. Not really. I turned my gaze to the city again. If this was all that was left, then what had come before? What had they lost? She led me toward a raised platform embedded with symbols that flickered as we approached. A faint hum filled the air, resonating in my bones. Instinct told me to hesitate. She extended a hand toward the platform. Step forward. I narrow my eyes. Why? You seek answers. This is the way to receive them. There was something final in her tone, as though she was offering me more than just information. As though stepping onto that platform would change something fundamental. I hesitated. Then, against every rational instinct, I stepped forward. The moment my foot touched the surface, my mind fractured. Not pain, not fear, just knowing. The world around me splintered into fragments, replaced by sight. Not with my eyes, but with something deeper, something ancient. A civilization that had once stretched across the stars. A people who had not conquered, but cultivated, shaping entire worlds not through war, but through thought, through will. They had created not with hands, but with intent. They had no hunger, no war, no division. They were not ruled by emotions, but neither did they reject them. They had simply never needed them. They existed in perfect equilibrium, until, slowly, inevitably, they began to die. Not through catastrophe, not through disease, but through something far worse. Decline, a slow unraveling, a diminishing of something fundamental. Their numbers dwindled, their essence faded. It was not a sickness, not an enemy to be fought. It was simply inevitability. They had searched, spanning galaxies, traveling through time itself, seeking an answer, a cure. But they did not find one among the stars. Until they found Earth, a world filled with creatures that burned with something they did not understand. A species imperfect, fragile, volatile, but alive in ways they had never been. Bound by a force they could not comprehend. Emotion, the one thing they lacked. The one thing they could not create within themselves. And so, they began to watch, to choose. The vision shattered. I stumbled back, my breath ragged, the city snapping into focus around me. My limbs trembled. My head ached with the weight of what I had just seen. I turned to her, my chest heaving. You're using us. Her expression did not change. We are surviving. The distinction sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I swallowed hard. By breeding with us? The words felt obscene, too raw, too primal for the sterile elegance of this world. That's why you took me? She tilted her head slightly. Not all are chosen. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. Then why me? For the first time, she hesitated. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible, but it was there. A flicker of something unreadable in her vast, starlit gaze. Because you felt the void, she said at last, and you did not run from it. I had no response to that. Because some part of me, some deep, unspoken part, knew she was right. I'd spent years drifting, moving through life without true purpose, without belonging. I had always been searching for something, even if I had never known what. She had seen that. Had I? I turned away from her, from the city, from the impossible sky. I needed to breathe. I needed to think, but thinking no longer felt safe. The city pulsed around me, alive in ways that defied explanation. The air itself seemed to hum, a resonance felt more in my bones than my ears. Every structure, every surface responded subtly to our movements, as if the entire world was watching, waiting. It was unnerving, but beneath the unease, something else stirred. A pull, faint but insistent, like a whisper at the edges of my mind. I turned to her, to the woman who had taken me. No, the woman who insisted I had come willingly. I wasn't sure which version of the truth was more terrifying. She stood just behind me, watching with that same impossible stillness, her expression unreadable. My voice was steadier than I expected. What happens to the ones who stay? She studied me for a long moment before answering. They become. I exhaled sharply. That's not an answer. She inclined her head slightly. It is the only one that matters. A flicker of frustration burned through me, but it was dulled by the weight of everything else. The knowledge I hadn't asked for, but could never unlearn. The city that moved like a living thing. The people, if they could be called that, shifting like mirages in the distance. And the man, standing at the far end of the chamber, watching me with an intensity that made my skin tighten. He looked human, but his eyes, vast, knowing, told me otherwise. They always ask the same things at first, he said, stepping closer. Where am I? What do they want? How do I go back? His lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. And then, eventually, they asked the only question that matters. I forced myself to meet his gaze, which is, his expression was unreadable. What am I now? The words landed like a stone in my gut. I swallowed against the weight of them. You're saying I've already changed? He didn't nod. He didn't need to. I turned back to her. What did you do to me? Her luminous gaze held mine, unblinking. We showed you. Something sharp twisted inside me. That's not an answer. It is the only one that matters, she said again. The same words, spoken with the same quiet certainty. My pulse spiked. My skin burned with the need for something tangible, something real, something I could grasp. I wanted to shake her, to demand clarity, but I knew that whatever truth lay beneath her words would not be simple. I took a slow, measured breath. And if I leave? The man's gaze darkened, something almost pitying flickering across his features. You can't. My jaw tightened. That's not what she said. She didn't lie, he admitted. But you won't return as you were. A chill slithered through me. Why not? This time, it was her who answered. Because you're no longer separate. The words sent a slow, creeping dread through my chest. Separate from what? I turned, scanning the chamber, as if I'd find the answer written on the walls. But the walls were shifting, changing, forming symbols I didn't recognize, patterns that tugged at something in the back of my mind. My breath turned shallow. You mean because I know too much? The man exhaled, almost tired. Because it knows you. A leaden weight settled in my stomach. I shook my head. That doesn't know. That's not how this works. But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. Because I felt it. The city beneath my feet. The pulse in the air. The way the structures weren't just responding to me, but recognizing me. The knowledge they had forced into my mind hadn't just entered me. It had woven itself into me. I wasn't just a visitor. I was becoming a part of it. A sharp breath escaped me. I stepped back, the movement reflexive, but the air thickened, as if the very space around me was resisting. My pulse hammered in my ears. Tell me how to stop it. Neither of them spoke. I took another step back. Tell me how to undo it. The man only watched. She only waited. I turned on her, voice raw. If I refuse, what happens to me? You will return, she said. A flicker of hope surged in my chest. Then send me back. A pause. Then, you will not be the same. The words hit harder than I expected. What does that mean? She hesitated. Not long, but long enough. It was the man who answered. You will forget. My breath caught. You will wake in your own world, in your own life, he continued, voice level. You will remember a dream, a feeling, but nothing more. The knowledge will fade. The pull will dull. I barely registered the words before she spoke again, softer this time. But it will never be gone. The chamber fell silent. Something inside me twisted. The weight of it, the inevitability. If I left, I would forget. but I would always feel the absence. The void where something vast had once been. I closed my eyes for a long moment. You always had a choice, she said, but now you must make it. I forced my breath to steady, forced my mind to focus. Stay, or go, lose everything, or live knowing I had lost something I could never name. I looked up, and for the first time I realized I already knew the answer. The weight of the choice settled in my chest, pressing against my ribs like something alive. Stay, and I surrendered to a world I barely understood. Leave, and I lost something I could never name. I had expected more from them: persuasion, urgency, maybe even desperation. Instead, they stood in silent patience. The woman, her luminous gaze unreadable, watched me as though she had already seen this decision unfold 1,000 times. The man, the one who was from Earth, held no expression at all. I turned my attention back to the city. It no longer shimmered with the same awe-inspiring mystery. It felt closer now, like an extension of something vast and unseen, something I had unknowingly stepped inside and could never truly leave. The air still pulsed, still moved with a rhythm I could not decipher, but I was beginning to feel it within myself. I didn't know if that terrified me or if I was already past the point of fear. My voice came quiet. If I go back, what happens to you? The woman blinked once. Nothing. That answer landed like a stone. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. My existence, my participation, was neither their salvation nor their destruction. I had been waiting to be needed, to be essential. I wasn't. That truth settled over me in an unexpected way, not as rejection, but as relief. The man exhaled softly, an almost human gesture. You're different from the others, he said. I turned to him, searching for mockery, but found none. Ow! You're not looking for an escape, he said. You're looking for a reason. The words struck deeper than I wanted them to. I looked at the woman again, searching her face for something: expectation, disappointment, anything to suggest she wanted me to choose her world. But there was no pressure there, no manipulation. Only patience. That unsettled me more than anything else. She hadn't forced me to come. She wouldn't force me to stay. This choice was mine alone. I swallowed, forcing my thoughts into something resembling clarity. You said I won't be the same if I go back. She inclined her head slightly. Yes. I hesitated. What does that mean? The man answered this time. It means you'll forget enough to go on, but never enough to be whole. The words sent a slow chill through me. He shifted, studying me. I've seen it before. They wake up in their own world, in their own lives, but there's something missing. They don't know what it is. They don't know why they feel it. But it's there. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I forced myself to exhale. And you? I asked. Did you choose to stay? The silence stretched too long. Finally, he said, I stopped thinking of it as a choice. His voice was steady, but I caught the flicker of something else, something not quite regret, not quite peace. I wanted to ask more, but I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The woman stepped forward, closer now. You don't have to be afraid. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was such a simple thing to say to someone standing on the precipice of the unknown. I met her gaze. That's the problem, I admitted. I don't think I am afraid. Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected the answer. The realization hit me as I said it. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even hesitant. The tightness in my chest wasn't fear, it was change. The unbearable weight of knowing that one way or another, I would never be who I was before. I turned my hands over, studying my palms as if I'd find something there that would make sense of it all. Stay. Go. I had spent so much time believing I was trapped in my own life, drifting without direction, waiting for something, anything, to change. And now, for the first time, I wasn't waiting anymore. I looked up. I'm staying. The words came with a certainty that surprised even me. They felt solid, real, like the first true decision I had ever made. The woman did not smile. She only nodded, as if the universe had simply corrected itself. The man studied me, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then, slowly, he extended a hand. I hesitated only for a second before clasping it. His grip was firm, steady, real. You won't regret it, he said. I had no way of knowing if that was true. But for the first time, I was willing to find out. The decision settled over me, quiet but unshakable. It was not the triumphant moment I had expected, nor did it bring the weight of finality I had feared. It simply was a step forward into something unknown, into a future that no longer felt distant but imminent. The city pulsed in quiet acknowledgement, its strange structures humming with an awareness I was only beginning to perceive. She stood before me, the woman who had led me here, watching with a gaze that felt deeper now, less like an observer and more like a guide. There was no celebration in her expression, no shift in demeanor to suggest satisfaction or victory, just acceptance, as if this had always been the path I would walk. Now, she said, you begin. A shiver traced my spine at the certainty in her voice. There was no ceremony, no ritual to mark the transition, no grand declaration that I belonged to this world now. And yet, the moment the words left her lips, something changed. The city no longer felt foreign. The air no longer felt borrowed. I had become part of it. The man who had once been from Earth, once studied me, his expression unreadable. There was something knowing in the way he held himself, as if he had already seen what I would become, as if he had once stood exactly where I was now. You're ready, he said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, glancing between them. For what? She did not answer, but she turned, striding forward with effortless grace, expecting me to follow. And I did. The city opened before us, its pathways shifting subtly, guiding us toward a destination I couldn't yet name. It was not a maze, but a living thing, unfolding in response to our movement. Structures towered above, spiraling in impossible formations, yet none of them felt oppressive. They reached upward, stretching toward the sky as if pulled by something unseen. I could feel it now, that unseen force. The same hum that thrummed in the walls, the same pulse that lingered beneath my skin. It wasn't sound. It wasn't energy. It was connection. A realization struck me with the quiet intensity of a whisper spoken too close to the ear. The city was not built. It was grown. I slowed, running my fingers along the smooth surface of one of the structures. It felt warm beneath my touch, pulsing in a rhythm I almost recognized, my own heartbeat. You feel it now, she said. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how to describe it. It's alive. It always was, she said. You simply could not hear it before. A quiet weight settled in my chest, equal parts awe and unease. The world I had entered was not made of stone and metal. It was something deeper, something sentient in a way beyond human comprehension. I swallowed, forcing my thoughts into order. You said I was ready. For what? She gestured ahead, toward a structure unlike the others. It was lower, its form more fluid, as if it had been shaped not by logic but by instinct. The entrance beckoned, dark and waiting. I turned to the man. Have you done this? He met my gaze without hesitation. Yes. I wasn't sure if that reassured me or not. I stepped forward, my breath steady but my pulse unrelenting. The space inside was vast, but not in a way that felt empty. It was filled with a presence, unseen but felt. She spoke, her voice softer now. You're not the first to stand here, and you will not be the last. I turned to her. What happens? You merge, she said simply. You become one with what has always been. Something in me rebelled at the phrasing. You mean I stop being me? She shook her head. You do not lose yourself. You expand. The air thickened, charged with something unseen. I looked back at the man, searching his face for remnants of the self he had once been. Had he changed? Had he lost something? Or had he simply grown into something else? I exhaled slowly. And if I walk away? You won't, he said. Not a command, just a fact. And I knew he was right. The structure pulsed around me, waiting. The city hummed in quiet anticipation. And then I stepped forward into the unknown. The moment I stepped forward, the world around me shifted. It wasn't sudden. There was no violent rupture, no disorienting pull, but a quiet, seamless transition, as though I had crossed an invisible threshold into something greater. The hum in the walls grew stronger, No longer just an external sound, but something that resonated within me, as if the very fabric of this place had extended itself in my body, merging with the rhythm of my breath, the pulse of my heart. I expected pain, some physical indication that I was changing, but there was none. Instead, there was an overwhelming presence. Not a singular consciousness, but many. They were not voices, not in the way humans understood them, but impressions, thoughts that drifted like currents through my mind. They carried no force, no urgency. They did not invade. They simply were, as if they had always been there, waiting for me to listen. I inhaled, steady but deep. I can hear them. The woman, my guide, my captor, my savior, whatever she truly was, watched with quiet certainty. You are part of them now. I turned my gaze inward, trying to make sense of the strange awareness pressing at the edges of my mind. What are they? Her expression remained serene. Memories. Echoes. The ones who came before. I stilled. Not ghosts, not lingering spirits, but something more permanent, woven into the essence of this place. This city was not only grown, it was inhabited. Is this what happened to you? I asked, looking at the man who had once been from Earth. His gaze was steady, but something flickered beneath it. Yes. The realization settled like a stone in my chest. He was not just living here. He was part of it. His thoughts, his emotions, his experiences, all absorbed into this vast, endless network of being. And now so was I. I reached out, not physically, but with something deeper, and felt 1,000 impressions pressing back. They were not human, not entirely. Some were vast and unknowable, consciousnesses that had existed before Earth had ever drawn breath. Others were like me, once separate, once struggling, now interwoven into something greater. I could still feel myself, my own mind, my own sense of identity, but it was no longer alone. It was cradled within something infinite. I exhaled slowly. This is what you meant by becoming. She nodded once. I flexed my fingers, half expecting to see something different in them, but they remained the same. My body had not changed, only my being. The fear I had anticipated never arrived. Instead, there was a sense of rightness. I turned to the man. Do you regret it? He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. I don't know what I would be without it. A non-answer, but I understood it. I could never go back. Not because they wouldn't allow it, but because the version of me that had belonged to Earth no longer existed. I had crossed a threshold that could not be undone. And yet, I did not mourn. I felt the city, its pulse, its breath, its quiet, waiting presence. It did not ask anything of me. It did not demand my loyalty, my servitude. It simply existed, and now I existed within it. For the first time in my life, I did not feel separate. I turned to the woman. What happens now? You live, she said simply. It was not a command, not an expectation, just a truth. I stepped forward, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, and the city welcomed me home.